My name's Shahrar Ali. I'm one of the co-founders of GreensCAN, and one of our aims is to speak to, in conversation with, key Greens. And today I'm absolutely delighted and pleasure to be able to speak to Steve Masters. Now, I met Steve Masters first last year, 2020, in the height of the summer, when he was camping, shall we say, in Jones Hill Wood. And I just wanted to start by asking you, Steve, around why you wanted to do that and what happened.
Yeah, no problem. And thanks for the invitation to chat. So how did I come to be camping in the woods at Jones Hill? It'd been my intention for a little while to get involved with the anti-HS2 movement. And as we were easing the first lockdown, there was a walk that was going from Birmingham to London. And I decided to join that for a little period of time. So I joined them after a day and a half, 2 days, I think, near Leamington Spa. And then I walked for 60 miles over the next 3 days, which was quite a challenge, having been in lockdown and been fairly sedentary. And then I got to Jones Hill on the Wednesday evening, I think, and fell in love with the place. Camped on the field just by the farm and met a few people, met Ross, who's one of the founders of the camp earlier in the year. Realized that I'd been in conversation with him online over the last 2 or 3 years through a mutual friend when he was up at Tinker Lane anti-fracking, and the ethos and and how the camp was set up was really good. So I decided to stay. I camped out for a few nights, had a few lessons in climbing, and then by the Monday evening, I was sleeping in a treehouse 60 odd feet up in the canopy, which was outstanding. So that's where I come. HS2 is obviously, as many of the viewers or people watching will know, is the infrastructure project to end all infrastructure projects in terms of its environmental vandalism. It's not going to be carbon neutral, and for over 120 years. And it's destroying lots of ancient woodlands and a great strip of the country between London, Birmingham, and they propose elsewhere.
So it's a great green cause. I think we can see that, wanting to save ancient woodland, which I think has also the added accolade of being one of the settings for Roald Dahl's books.
Yes.
So that's important to us in terms of heritage. And then there's the wildlife. There's the extraordinary, unfathomable cost of HS2, particularly during the pandemic. And I've heard you speak about the wildlife, the bats in particular. And surely they are also a key reason why we have to increasingly think about how we build on this planet of ours.
Oh, absolutely, undoubtedly. The biodiversity in Jones Hill is extremely precious, and one of the things, it wasn't just a case of sitting in the wood and waiting for HS2 to come and knock on the door and say, get out. While we were there, we had volunteers and people who were staying with us, but people coming from academia and NGOs doing surveys about the biodiversity. And a few days before the eviction actually started, we confirmed that there was an extremely precious roost of Barb bats, which are some of the rarest bats in the country. So HS2 were not fully on board with their licensing and permissions. So we've got injunctions in place, and they now happen to conduct surveys. They're still wriggling. Even now, you've probably seen there's been there's a fundraiser to make sure that if they do go in without the proper licenses now, because actually they're supposed to be surveying from April through till late summer, but they appear to be wanting to just go in anyway. So we have to be on our guard. It's a credit to the people at Jones Hill that Jones Hill is still standing. If they hadn't been there, they would have leveled it without a doubt.
Now you're also an elected Green councillor since May 2019 in West Berkshire. How did you manage to combine? I understand you got a bit of flack whilst you're out there, maybe from the odd Conservative, but how did you manage to combine your direct action with council chamber activity?
The remote working aspect of COVID and, you know, working from home, and council meetings were suspended in late March, early April. So we were working on Zoom, like many organisations, and that is what freed me up to, you know, to be able to stay there for the period of time I did. I had my council laptop with me the whole time. I had a really good solar panel and a battery storage. So for right up until the eviction, I hadn't had to charge my council laptop or my phones on anything other than solar. So that was, you know, that was a really good way of working. And yeah, I did get some flack, and, you know, it's I think that comes with the territory, you know, where I'm not a natural politician. I'm more of an activist, I think. I spent some time at Leaf Hill on the campaign there in the over New Year 2017, about 4 years ago, and that's where that was the first time I'd spent any time under canvas and, you know, or, you know, in a wood for a few nights. So it was something I wanted to come back. Getting elected was off the back of all the local campaigning I've done in regards to homelessness and the environmental impact locally. So yeah, it was tough at times, you know, sitting up in a tree at 6 p.m. With the wind blowing, and, you know, you're trying to ask questions of the executive and hold them to account. And there was some dissenters, quite vocal. You know, I had to answer questions in the press on a couple of occasions, but the public support was overwhelmingly positive. You know, I think the first time there was something in the paper with one of the Conservatives complaining that I wasn't in my ward, there was a letter in 5-6 weeks running from different people saying, you know, actually, we didn't even know Steve was away. He's been doing his casework for us without any problem. So yeah, you know, you get a thick skin. I've probably not got as thick a skin as I'd like, but yeah, it was a wonderful experience, and I think, you know, moving forward, as you know, it's a model that many Green councillors should be looking to adopt. I think we need to be more proactive and show leadership, you know.
Absolutely. Hats off to you. And we really, many of us from a distance, obviously, and using social media, were following closely and admiring what you were doing. And you were putting yourself at some risk, weren't you? Tell us about one of the more hair-raising moments when the fellows came in.
Well, they came in at about 5:30 on the morning of the 1st of October. We knew they were coming. We'd had a tip off that they were in, that the NET team, the National Eviction Team, were in local hotels. And so actually about 12 hours before they arrived, I was actually sat in a hotel bar with one of the local women who's one of our, you know, part of our support network at Jones Hill, listening to the plans of you know, and all the guys sat around having their dinner and, you know, drinking beer the night before they were going to come and kick us out, which was it was a little bit weird being the spy rather than the spied on. And it was only when I got out and back in the car to go back to Jones Hill, I realized I was in my custody suite trousers from my previous lock-on arrest. So I must have looked a right state. The next day they came, they cleared about half the tree houses on the first 24 hours. And then they came to the area where I was, which was a little bit deeper into the wood. And the rain started, and it started late on the first night. But they came and they destroyed my tree house. So I was sat basically on a wooden spar in the tree top with my arm in a lock on. But they tried to strip me of all my waterproof and protective gear, basically to freeze me out. And it was pretty cold. So I was deteriorating a little bit. And my friend and fellow activist Ross, who I mentioned earlier, they were coming to arrest him from his tree across the way, and he said, look, can you get Steve sorted? And I was stuck in the lock-on because the eviction team had tried to pull me out of the tree without any regard for my personal safety. But it was done in such a way I couldn't unclip myself, so they had to come and get me get me out of it. So I got out of there. The police took me down. The police, to be honest, when I've my dealings on an individual basis, they've been, quite professional, and their safe working is a lot better than the NET. But there are occasions when the police do seem to overstep the mark and almost turn a blind eye to some of the violence that's meted out by the eviction, the eviction teams. Many of them are nightclub bouncers by profession, so it can be quite scary and intimidating.
Tell me about the relationship you think the police have to HS2 PLC, because there seems to be an issue there, doesn't there?
Yeah, they have. As far as I'm aware, they have a task group there, so they can manage and coordinate the response and policing of the HS2 sites, around protests. They have a task group which is made up of the various police forces: Thames Valley, Hertfordshire, the Metropolitan Police, I would guess, and the West Midlands Police, I think, up towards Leamington and Birmingham. So it would appear that there's quite a lot of, and I think that's been part funded, and rightly so on one level, as far as the public purse is concerned. HS2 have been funding that, but that doesn't then kind of look like you've got some kind of level of collusion and what have you. So I'm pretty sure that HS2 know exactly who I am on a fairly detailed basis. In fact, on my first lock-on near Jones Hill, when we took the fight directly to HS2 on the bypass at Wendover, the foreman came up and he and was referring to me by name, quite formally, and I've heard comments where they say, oh yeah, he's an elected councillor and this, that, the other. So it would be very difficult. I'd like to see proof that they don't, but I think it would be far easier to prove that there is some kind of collusion between them. And that maybe is one for the lawyers, I don't know.
What do you say to those detractors, both inside your political party and outside, in the outside world, who try and revive support in HS2 and challenge those who want to stop it, and by maybe comparing their campaigning against HS2 to apparently their low profile against roads?
Again, I think that's a bit of a false equivalent. When the more pro or more sympathetic to HS2 do like to say, oh, the alternative is more road building. Well, actually, no. Many of us who are campaigning against HS2 are very much against an expansion of road building. We know that we need to be reducing traffic and freight, commuting by road as much as any other carbon intensive method. So it's passed off as a one or the other, and it's certainly not. I'm very much against the Wensum link around Norwich, in Norfolk, and the expressway between Oxford and Cambridgeshire. That's going to be another battleground in the next few years if they persist and push on that. So it's I think it's a bit of deflection to try and say, green trains are green. Yes, we know that trains are green, but HS2 is not a green, transport system for many reasons. The faster you go, it's just pure physics that says, that the more speed that you want, it's going to cost more energy to get there. So high speed is not always the best,
I mean,
we do need to, and as a society, we need to slow down. It's always about progress. I was on talk radio the other day, and the guy who was on, he was so poorly briefed about the whole issue. You know, and he talked about progress, and it's not progress. So, you know, and sometimes a bit of progress might be that we just step back, you know, step back to go forward. You know, let's look at how we do things, slow down. You know, we have to be busy. I don't know. There's a whole, you know, there's many rabbit holes we could go down about why, but you know, in terms of the people who say we need HS2, pre-COVID, their argument was weak on cost, environmental impact, and transforming, you know, the transport landscape. Post-COVID, it's blown out of the water beyond any, you know, there's no anybody arguing for HS2 is not really particularly credible right now, as far as I'm concerned.
Because there are going to be, people call it the new normal, don't they? But there are going to be so many changes in how people work now in terms of spatio-temporal location. And one of the things that may have been an advantage was to get from A to B quicker, but now you're no longer needing to get to that place B because you're going to be working more agile, you know, in an agile, smart way.
Yeah.
So perhaps that part of the business case has fallen. But finally, really, suppose somebody was only campaigning against HS2. I mean, it's a landmark project and they weren't campaigning on roads. Where's the hypocrisy in that? I mean, we've all got limited energy, haven't we?
We've all got limited energy. And this is one of the things that makes me chuckle when they're going, oh, you know, you're against HS2, but why aren't you doing the roads? I don't see many of those people campaigning and camping out in trees to protect the countryside against those very roads, you know. So, you know, they're using an argument against us, you know, against myself and fellow activists that they're not holding up to themselves. Why aren't they blocking the Wensum link? Why aren't they sat in a tree stopping the, you know, the widening of X carriageway here? So, yeah, there's
now,
a, you know, yeah, I think HS2 have a very active PR department. You know, many, you know, so it's hard to discern which, you know, which campaign groups are real. It's disappointing that we don't have unity in the, you know, in the party about this, but yeah, I think it's a loud but minor voice.
Now we've said a little bit about direct action using non-violence, and it's happening also in Euston in the tunnels. What do you see as the wider role of non-violence in politics? Does it actually work? And is the reason people have to resort to non-violent direct action that politics is broken?
And that's a big question. So in terms of why we have to do, you know, I'm an elected councillor. We've made some positive effects on local politics. So, you know, we've certain things here in West Berkshire already in you know, less than 2 years. But the power of money in politics is one of the big issues. You know, I think there was a study done in America, but it translates quite well, that lobby groups and vested interests have a far greater influence on legislation and government policy than your average member of the public. So, and this is part of the reason why many people are disenfranchised, don't engage politically. And what I find interesting is that even on the right of our politics in this country, that many of them see that HS2 is not the right project for them, you know, but they're coming at it from a financial aspect, or they're coming at it from a property aspect, you know. not necessarily coming from an environmental aspect, angle as many of us are. But I come from it from a financial aspect as well, because, it's money that could be spent on, the existing network. But in terms of why we have to resort to it, it's because despite the representation that we get in politics at whatever level, it doesn't change anything. And protest is a fundamental human right. Article 10 and 11, after my second arrest in the summer, we'd been given bail conditions. In fact, after the first one, we'd been given extremely draconian bail restrictions. So we were almost compelled to break them, so we would get in front of a magistrate or a judge and say, look, this is against our right to protest under Article 10 and 11. And we went and we got them reduced. I couldn't go within 50 meters of a HS2 site. I couldn't congregate with other protesters for a time. And power will use whatever it has at its means. And that's where there's a certain element of collusion, I think, between corporate interests such as HS2 and the authorities. Because when we come out of it was interesting, when we get released from the police station at 2 a.m, they always seem to release you at godforsaken time in the night, if you haven't got caught the next morning. And there's always a HS2 vehicle sat there or driving past, waiting to see who and when the people have been released. So vested interests and power have far more sway than we do, and non-violent direct action is central to how we can fight back and have our voices raised. And people turn around and go, oh, you shouldn't be doing that, should have respect for the police. I have the respect for the police. My grandfather was a police inspector from in the West Yorkshire Police well, he was an inspector for a period of time, but he was in the police force for 20-30 years. And it's when those tools of the state are used against the best interests of people that we have, the individuals such as myself. 10 years ago, I would never have imagined that I would be doing this. I was environmentally minded. I had an allotment, I kept the bees, but stepping out of my comfort zone and putting my body on the line and putting my liberty on the line was something that I never thought would be something I did. My dad was a prison officer as well. So, you don't get much more mainstream kind of blue collar citizen, citizens minded. I did 20 years in the Air Force, and it says something when somebody with my background and ancestry.
So I'm glad. So you very nicely brought us round to my final question, actually, because you've spoken with great insight and passion and verve about your actions, your direct actions that you've taken for environmental reasons. And you've said a little bit about your family. And I think, viewers might be interested to hear more about what brought you into politics in the first place and what you did before you were in politics. And tell us a little bit about that and what life skills, if you like, that might have taught you and given you.
I left school age 16 with a handful of O levels, fairly average. I think five O levels. I think I was the last year to do O levels in 1986. Early October. In fact, actually, yeah, I'm not. So the 1st of October, when they started the eviction at Jones Hill, was the first anniversary of me going to my training camp. I signed up on the end of September, and and I got the train to Swinderby, which is near Newark and Lincoln, between Lincoln and Newark, on the 1st of October, 86. And that was the start of nearly 20 years in the Air Force as a mechanic and then as an engineering technician, working on a number of different aircraft, from Air Cadet gliders to the English Electric Canberra was one of my first jobs, and but also nuclear armed jet bombers in in Germany for a short period of time. And yeah, I went all over the world. I mean, it was a great life, and I would recommend public service to any. My eldest son is a soldier right now, and I would never have stopped him going and finding his way. I talked to him about how things are, and like many public services, the military are underfunded at a at the front line level. The amount of kit that my son has to, so it's a part of a broader. That's another conversation. That's a broader. But I did 20 years. I left the Air Force not long after the Second Gulf War, having served out there, and then spent time in Basra late in 2003, and by early 2005, I'd basically left. I was a little bit disillusioned. I was quite anti the war, which was a bit weird being out in the war. And I did various bits. They had internet security. They had it was called NIPPERNet. It's an American kind of to stop basically people looking at inappropriate websites and stuff like that. But they banned everything. So and it was a disciplinary. So I remember that the news sites for the Sun and other tabloid pages, papers were banned, and so I knew that I would probably get sent home so we had a bit of a campaign internally where we would all deliberately, but there were so many people doing it, they just gave up in the end. Just there was a lot of people, and it was one of those. Before we came on here, we were chatting, and I talked about being in London at the time of the marches for the anti-war stuff, and I was home for a week's R&R. And I flew back via Cyprus at the end of that period. And one of the things that really, really sealed it in terms of the Second Gulf War being a completely American motivated imperial adventure was when I sat on the aircraft. It was a VC-10. We were flying from Cyprus into Iraq. And I was sat across from a group captain and a wing commander, quite senior officers, in terms of the day-to-day operations. And they were openly questioning the merits of why we were going to war. Now, I was a young NCO, probably just over 30 by then, I think. And it struck me as there's one thing that even in the RAF, which is a fairly free-thinking kind of organisation relative to a lot of army units, you don't hear senior officers expressing doubt and concern. They might do privately in the mess between themselves or whatever, but on essentially a public plane, it was a military transport aircraft, so there was 200 or 300 people on there. But expressing that, I was quite free thinking and opinionated myself. I kept abreast of what was going on and what the issues were. But there was young private soldiers sat around us who would have heard that, and that was quite telling. And that was a game changer for me. So I came back from the Gulf War, had a month or two off, and then I went back out to Basra for 2 or 3 months, just as the continuing occupation. And don't get me wrong, it was an adventure. It was adventurous, and you can see why people get caught up, in stuff like, in the First World War, the PAL, the PALS units, and the camaraderie and the bravado of those kind of things. But I was getting more and more disillusioned with the state of what was going on. So they asked for people to take voluntary redundancy, which I applied for. I didn't get it. They decided to promote me, which I turned down and left anyway, which, on the face of it, 3 years away from a pension would have, been a bit irresponsible, but I don't think I've ever regretted that. And even though I've had many woes, so I suffered from depression. I went and worked in London, which was cycling is my sport, and I'm passionate about cycle sport, and I got a job in London for an internet startup that focused on cycling. And I went all over Europe following professional cycling, and it was a great adventure. But the boss was a bit of a tyrant and a bully, and I had a bit of a breakdown. And then I spent quite a long time recovering from that, having left. And I then had to get myself back sorted, mentally, because I wasn't working for about 18 months, 2 years. And I went to Ruskin College and studied history with social science. I'm sure many people watching will know Ruskin has a reputation of being quite a left-wing and radical institution back in the day. I think it's kind of lost its way a little bit at the moment. There's been quite a lot of changes in the last five or 6 years. But I went there, and it was the making of me. I discovered, history. I went there looking to study stuff about my grandfather, who'd served in the Second World War, and ended up writing my dissertation on a suffrage campaigner from West Berkshire called Anna Munro. And now I haven't done one for a couple of years, but I do occasionally do talks about her and the impact that she had on the movement. And so I ended up becoming a bit of a historian, but also a little bit more aware of the social aspects of class, race, and general, the challenges that we face even now, 100 plus years ago, compared to, and it's the same people who are decrying, they're advocating to not, the right wing would have been, the people who the bad actors that we see now in terms of social change, and would have been the same people who would have been denying women the vote 100 plus years ago, would have been fighting the abolitionists 200 years ago. So the fight's still there, and that's why we need to be challenging them wherever we can. And there's many on the HS2 protest movement that say it's more than just the railway. It's the social impact. Why are we spending 100+ billion, and it may get as much as 200 billion, when we could, when there's so much more that we could do on a social and social level with the issues that we have around the country. So yeah, I think I was radicalized at Ruskin College, if you like.
No, that's absolutely fascinating, and what we do clearly does define us. And I've seen you in action in the wood, thinking through projects like an engineer, it has to be said. And I think those kinds of projects, our ability, almost as a human race, let alone as a civilization, a Western civilization, our ability to meet goals, to abate carbon consumption, that's going to be increasingly important, isn't it? That, just our ability to reshape and remold post and certainly pre-COVID, how we organize society. We're going to have to become doers, aren't we?
Yes. I mean, I wouldn't claim to be at the cutting edge of engineering, but the big, you asked what skills it brought, being in the services. A, there's a resilience. And B, being able to put up with nonsense. There's a phrase in the military of on the bus, off the bus, because stuff will happen, you get messed around. So you have to have that certain amount of resilience and patience, because, it's going to, things are going to go awry and not necessary to plan. But one of the biggest things I learned is that you can't do everything yourself. So there's people who've got incredible talent, so incredibly creative in terms of mechanically. I was an adequate mechanic. I think after 20 years, they'd managed to erode any passion for engineering out of me that I had. But what I did learn was how to build a team and how to motivate people, with a sense of, communal purpose. There's leaders out there that that berate and shout and, and discipline. In all my time as an NCO, I never had to discipline anybody, but I led small groups of disparate individuals, and we achieved tasks. And I think that's what I bring. I know I'm not going to necessarily be able to tie every rope or build, something that's, needed in the wood, but I'm fairly sure I know people who can, and they'll see that I'm passionate about what I'm doing, and that will translate into them wanting to work towards the same purpose. And I think that's probably the biggest skill I garnered from from the military. So.
Well, thank you, Steve.
No problem.
It's been a real pleasure to hear about not just your work on the ground as a green politician and environmentalist, but partly what led you onto this path. And the RAF's loss is certainly the environmentalist gain. So thank you again, Steve. It's been a real pleasure and an honor to hear also about leadership and teamwork.
Yeah,
we're certainly going to need a lot of.
Oh, we're going to need it's the
overcome.
The fight is far from over. Jones Hill still stands at present, but it's it's continually under threat, and I'm sure
we shall overcome. Thank you, Steve.
Cheers.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.